The Denver Broncos dropped their season opener to the Las Vegas Raiders 17-16. What are our key takeaways? How did the offense look? Some injury updates and more. You're going to get that with a cup of coffee on this morning's brand new episode, GMB. What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Good Morning Broncos here. Not such a good morning here for Broncos Country as the Broncos are coming off of a loss to the Las Vegas Raiders 17-16 at Empire Field at Mile High. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter here from Mile High Sports. And what you're going to get on today's episode of the show, a little bit of a shorter recap as to what happened. Obviously, Denver not getting off to the start that they wanted to on the season, dropping 0-1. Lose a divisional game, you lose to, a home game, and you lose a conference game here. But I think right now you're looking at it, the AFC West right now is very interesting. The Raiders sit atop in first place, 1-0. The Chiefs, the Chargers, the Broncos, all 0-1 to start here. What if I were to tell you that the Broncos coming into the game, their goal was to limit Josh Jacobs and his big playability alongside Devontae Adams, and they did both that, but they still lost. Well, let's talk about it here on GMB. Now, obviously, I think for Denver in this game, just mistakes that they made consistently, whether it came through penalties, whether it came in the kicking game, it all came back to haunt them at certain points of this game and unfortunately contributed in the outcome for them in Sunday's season opening loss. Not the ideal situation you wanted to start the season, but seeing a lot of fans already throwing the towel on the season after a week one loss. Like, folks, if we have to get to a point now where, okay, Denver loses a game, I get, hey, 7 years of losing has been so frustrating for the fan base. I understand that. But the fact that you're going to lose week one and fans are already saying, all right, hey, season's over. Here's the deal. If the season is over after week one, please never comment or never talk about the Broncos until next year. Like, the reality is Denver lost. Was it something that, hey, like they could have changed a lot of things. There are certain things that could have went better for them that could have contributed in the outcome of them maybe winning, but the season's already over, according to some people on social media. It's just a pet peeve of mine that I have here because, look, we were all so excited that football was back, but yet the toxicity in this fan base, and look, it's not just the Broncos fan base, this other fan base, other teams deal with the same stuff, but it doesn't make the conversation very fun to have. I think for a lot of people, overreacting to a week one loss says a lot about just maybe where this fan base is at from a mental state here. Yeah, it sucks, but you know what? There's a long season ahead here. So let's put some logic into this whole conversation that we're about to have here. Broncos putting up 16 points. I mean, losing week one last year to the Seahawks 17-16, losing week one of the Raiders. Not ideal here, but this isn't the same Broncos offense as last year from an operations standpoint. I think overall Denver had a much more better rhythm to them in this game. They controlled the time of possession 32 minutes in comparison to the Raiders 27 minutes in this game. And realistically, both teams offensively, they were identical. I mean, each team had 22 first downs. They were 5 of 11 on third down each. Denver had 260 total yards, while the Raiders had 261 total yards. The Raiders had more passing yards in this game, 200 to be exact, while the Broncos had more rushing yards, 94. They held Josh Jacobs in check there. They held him to 19 carries for 48 yards. And here's the reality of the situation. I think that, okay, hey, you can learn from some of these things. You look at this game in totality, 20 total penalties called on both sides, the Raiders and Broncos. Bill Vinovich, he was in his bag. He was throwing penalties, but some of these penalties cost Denver in this game here, and specifically on 2 touchdown scoring drives for the Raiders. Some of those drives, 2 of those drives got extended because of a penalty, whether unnecessary roughness or a late hit on that first one there. The timing just was not fortunate, and obviously there's some things that Denver's going to have to clean up. And when you go through and you hear guys talking in the post-game locker room, they're talking about, hey, there's things that we did better, but there's things we got to clean up. And if we clean these things up, it'll be the difference between a win and a loss. And certainly that is the case here. But let's talk about, okay, what is the main difference in this game specifically? I think when you look at the Broncos offense and Russell Wilson, we saw a much more comfortable Russell Wilson than we saw all of last year. I think the overall operation was pretty good with Russ here. Now, the approach for them was a little bit different here. Denver obviously wanted to come in and run the football when they had the lead. That was their identity here. But the one thing that stood out to me was Denver was methodical with how they moved the ball downfield. They were dinking and dunking. They weren't necessarily trying to take too many deep shots downfield. They went with a lot of heavy tight end personnel usage, 12 and 13, as we had talked about there. And when Greg Dulchich went out with an injury late in the second quarter, we saw the Broncos bring in Quinn Bailey as an extra offensive lineman to add there. You didn't have the downfield passing threat here because obviously, one, no Jerry Jeudy in this game. Cortland Sutton's still on the team, and he had a little bit of an impact there. But we saw the Broncos just really try to spread the ball out here. Russell Wilson connected with 11 different receiving options in this game for Denver. And that's what you have to do when you don't have a guy like Jerry Jeudy, but also when you're playing a Raiders defense that has Max Crosby, who's just been an absolute boogeyman. Now, he did come away with a sack in this game here, but he didn't damage the game in the way that he has in years past here. And that was because of the game plan. It's, hey, let's get the ball to Russell Wilson's hands quickly. Let's get him rolling outside the pocket, and let's get him throwing quickly. And that's exactly what he did in this game here. So that's not where my gripe is here for the Broncos. Unfortunately, it's penalties. 10 penalties to be exact for 83 yards has set them back here. But I'd say mainly the reason that Denver lost this game, they gave us some plays defensively. Damari Mathis didn't have a great game, but the reason they lost is because they missed an extra point. They missed a field goal. The 4-point swing right there, you know, the game's a little bit different. The flow and the ending of that game is entirely different here for the Broncos. It may be a 20-17 situation, or maybe 20-13 where the Raiders have to score a touchdown late in that game. These are the things that, you know, hey, you look back and say, okay, if they did this, what would the outcome have been? We never know here. But obviously, when you lose 17-16 and you leave 4 points out there on the field, potentially even more, yeah, it's rough to overcome that. And I don't expect any team to be able to do just that. But we'll talk about some injury updates. We'll talk about some performances as well. You get that here on today's episode of GMB. Real quick, let me tell you about our good friends over there, Superbook Sports. Why bet with the big boys this football season? Instead, try your hand with a local book. Superbook Sports this fall. Superbook Sports is the book next door, just a dedicated team of the best odds makers in Las Vegas, making sure that you get the best prices and parlays anywhere. And now Superbook will give you a bonus of up to $250 when you sign up and wager on the same day and use the code MILEHIGH. So bet with the best and use promo code MILEHIGH this football season with Superbook Sports. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's continue our conversation on today's episode of GMB. Unfortunately, not a victory Monday here for the Denver Broncos. We talked about Russell Wilson, the Broncos offense looking better here. We've got to talk about the offense there in terms of the rushing offense, 94 total yards of rushing attack there between Samaje Perine, Javonte Williams. Liked what I saw from those guys in that department here, but injuries definitely had a little bit of an impact to Denver here. And I think specifically on the offensive side of the ball, no Jerry Jeudy in this game. Pre-game, he was testing his hamstring out in front of Dan Dalrymple, the team's strength and conditioning coach, general manager George Payton, head coach Sean Payton, and he was moving relatively well, but I think it was a smart move to hold him out of this game here because hamstrings are very, very tricky, and a guy who dealt with hamstring injuries last season, Greg Dulcich, left the game late in the second quarter with a hamstring injury as well. He kind of pulled up after a play, and he was pointing down at his hamstring area. He did not return, and you can definitely tell that they missed his presence a little bit with his speed and the size that he has maybe across the middle of the field there. They had to rely on Adam Troutman, who doesn't necessarily have the speed that Dulcich does, but he's been a reliable pass-catching option there for Russell Wilson. So obviously that's big. The Broncos are going to do an MRI. We'll find out a little bit more from Sean Payton as the week progresses here. Defensively, an injury to Caden Sterns. He was carted off in the first quarter with a knee injury, did not return here. The Broncos believe it is a serious knee injury, but there is hope that it's not an ACL. An MRI will have to be conducted here to see maybe where Denver is at on that side of things. But Denver, for the most part, came out of the game relatively healthy, minus losing Caden Sterns and obviously Greg Dulcich. Those are two big blows for you. But there are some other teams around the NFL that lost a lot of players. The Ravens just lost a ton of players in week one here. So hopefully Denver can get, some good news on Dulcich, and hopefully the news on Caden Sterns isn't as bad as maybe people fear. But obviously our thoughts and well wishes are with Caden Sterns and Greg Dulcich. You did see Dulcich in the locker room after the game and didn't seem like he was in down spirits. He seemed like he was in pretty good spirits there. So I think that could be a promising sign here for the Broncos. But let's take a look by the numbers here. Really the outcome, what determined this game here was just we talk about the 1 of 2 field goal attempts, the missed extra point. Denver, for the most part, when you look at the operations of the offense, 32 minutes time of possession there. I thought Sean Payton had a really good flow there. Denver, unfortunately, they couldn't capitalize on getting a touchdown after a roughing the kicker call was happened on the Raiders there when they punted it away. They hit Riley Dixon. They had to settle for a field goal, which obviously you're going to take points, right? That gave Denver 16 points there. But you want to come away with touchdowns there, unfortunately. So Denver, with the missed field goal, they came away. They had 6 total offensive drives in this game here. If they would have made that 55-yard field goal that Will Lutz admits, they would have scored on 4 of their 6 possessions there. 3 of their 6 possessions had 10 or more plays there, so good flow, good sustainability and mitigating what, like I said, Max Crosby from being able to go off. But here's really the vibe and the story of the game here from the Denver's defensive side of the ball here. Patrick Surtain versus Davante Adams. That's what people wanted to see. And according to NFL Next Gen Stats, Patrick Surtain, he guarded Davante Adams on 16 out of 26 possible reps in terms of shading him there, but only allowed 2 catches on 5 targets for 11 yards there. So a great matchup there. Surtain did a fantastic job in this game. They tried to do a flea flicker, and Surtain didn't bite on it at all, knocked the ball away, had a couple of pass breakups, 3 passes defensed here for Surtain on Sunday. But aside from all that, I mean, this is where the Broncos are at 0-1 to start the season. Now you have a home game coming up against the Washington Commanders. You're going to have to find a way to piece some things together here to get a win here because, hey, it's going to be a little bit tough sledding coming up here. Miami on the road in week 3. Tyreek Hill put up over 200 yards receiving against the Chargers. They put up a lot of points. And you got the Bears in week 4 here. So Denver, I think you have to find a way to get a win here week 2. I think it's a winnable game against the Commanders. The offense did a lot of things relatively well. I know fans are going to be frustrated about the 16 total points scored, but I think Denver is heading in the right direction in comparison to where we were at last year having the same exact conversation. I think that the operations on the offensive side of the ball was smoother. What does it look like when Jerry Jeudy gets reintroduced in the offense? And hey, the game plan, based on who you're going against, the game plan changes every single week. Now, obviously, Washington has a pretty solid defensive line. Not expected to have Chase Young in this game against Denver, but you have some other guys you have to account for, and Montez Sweat, and obviously Jonathan Allen on the defensive line there for them. So I thought the overall protection for Russ was pretty good. The operation was good. Russ had a really good performance, 27 of 34, 177 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 to Lil Jordan Humphrey, and then 1 to Cortland Sutton. I think it just changes a little bit. You didn't see as much downfield prowess there just because of the fact that, hey, you can't allow Max Crosby on one side to pressure you while sending a blitz on the other side there on Russell Wilson's blind spot. And you didn't want to have that happen. So Denver went the dink and dunk approach, which I think was the right call in this game here. But yeah, overall, I don't have a lot of complaints about the offense. I think that they look much more competent than where they were last year. Defensively, Damari Mathis having a rough game there. And look, Broncos fans want to write him off and say, hey, cut him, trade him. I think it's just wild. And look, this is just fandom. I know fans are very emotional about the outcome of a game here, but Damari Mathis has proven to be a pretty good young cornerback, right? And last year as a rookie, he stepped up into a big role and played relatively well for Denver. So yeah, he didn't have the game. He had a bad game. I think we can all acknowledge that. But to say just to trade him and cut him, like, come on, folks, one game, you got to, I understand the emotions are high, which means the level of reasoning is a little bit lower here. But I think it's way too early to write off Damari Mathis. Let him get an opportunity to bounce back here in week 2. And look, hey, if the issue continues to persist, then I think that's where you look at maybe making a change there. Jaquan McMillan, a healthy scratcher. You have Fabian Moreau. You have Tremont Smith on the roster there. So if you really want to make a change, if the issue persists, then you revisit it. But you don't do that after one bad game. I think Damari, knowing his demeanor, knowing his stature, he's going to bounce back. And look, I'd say the overall vibes in the locker room, the guys were frustrated that they lost, but here's the deal. I think that they believe that they're in a better spot than they were last year. Week 1 is not going to define the entire season here, Broncos country. So let's see where Denver goes. We'll see if Will Lutz can get back into the game here after missing an extra point and obviously missing a 55-yard field goal in Sunday's loss. It could have been a difference maker in the outcome of this game. Unfortunately, Denver drops to 0-1 on the season. Commanders week is coming up here. We'll have you updated here on the latest injury statuses of Greg Dulcich, Caden Sterns, and more as we find out more from Broncos head coach a little bit later on here in the week. You get all that on GMB.